Yeah, we're back again, folks. Eric and we got a special guest today, who is a friend and also I dare to say partner, because his level of intellect is way above my. I missed that day of school, Eric.
It's above your pay grade.
Neuroscience. I in fact, sometimes I don't even get it right. When I met Jake, and Jake can clear this up. By the way, our guest is Jake VanLandingham, who is down in Tallahassee, is a diehard Florida State Seminole fan. And I met Jake roughly, I'm going to say about 8 years ago, 7 or 8 years ago. And he, at the time, he was the head of, and I'm probably going to get this wrong, the neuroscience department, or what is it, Jake? What you were?
Right. I was one of the members of the biomedical sciences department at the Florida State University College of Medicine, but I'm a member of the neuroscience program there too at the time.
Yeah. Again, I missed that day of school, but so a mutual friend of ours, and this is how we basically met, is a doctor here in town in Hattiesburg, Dr. David Lee, great guy. David, at the time, was doing brain and neck surgeries, super smart guy. And he said, would you be willing to meet with this guy that I'm friends with, and I think I'm going to invest in his company or his product? His name is Jake VanLandingham. He will drive up here, and basically he's wanting you to get involved to some extent with this concussion drug that he is developing. And I was like, my playing days are over, but I'll listen. More of a favor for David. So sat down with Jake. We met at Bus, my agent's office, and I think there was probably about 6 of us maybe that met. And basically Jake just laid out what he had up to that point, what his vision was, and more or less was looking to have basically an NFL player or former player kind of help navigate through the NFL channels. So I was, after the meeting was over, I was really, before the meeting, I was not very excited about it. But when I left, I was pretty intrigued. Not so much because this concussion drug would help me, because I asked that question, but the fact that we could be pioneers in this. I say I didn't develop anything, but being there basically at the start of when all this began, and make a difference, not only in the NFL, and yeah, they get most of the attention, but as Jake likes to say, and I agree with him, the military, youth, where it's most important. So I was sort of intrigued, and I really thought, Eric, that I could get my foot, and then therefore Jake's foot and our product in the door of the NFL. And I was really surprised that here we are still today, and we've made a lot of strides, but we still have a long ways to go. But that could happen very quickly, or it could still linger on. I've learned that, and Jake can elaborate on it more. But so we met, we struck up a friendship, and we'd go 6 months without talking, texting, and then it would fire back up. It would slow down, fire back up. And I learned that's kind of how this works. It's not because Jake messed up. It's not because I was on a hiatus. It just is how it kind of works. And so Jake is joining us today, and we're talking about concussions. We're talking about the drug that he has developed. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Eric, and we'll have Jake elaborate on what he's doing.
Yeah, great. And congratulations to both of you. I think, Brett, you touched on it. Not necessarily what's happening with Brett Favre, but what's happening with young people in the NFL, what's happening with young people in college football, high school football, all the way down to Pop Warner League. You know, let's have a discussion, Jake. Well, why don't we just give the floor to you and tell us about the drug and tell us where it stands. Tell us, you know, have a little bit of a history with the pharmaceutical companies. I know the difficulty of getting FDA approval on things and whatnot, and tell us where this drug stands and what you hope for it to do and what you hope your partnership with Brett brings out in helping kids and helping people.
Thanks, Eric. Always nice to hang out with Brett too, and I appreciate you, Brett, and all you've done for us. Don't make light of Brett's role in here. He has been there the entire time pushing this, trying to get it awareness out there that it's time to treat. I mean, before I go into sort of the science of the drug, I think it's important to note that there is no treatment for concussion. We won't, and we intend to work with the NFL. The NFL, nor the Department of Defense, nor the NIH, for that matter, has ever given a penny to developing a treatment for concussion. It's all been about developing diagnostics. Hey, did you have a concussion or didn't you? And also, obviously, better helmets. Well, and Brett speaks to this often when we get out there and do awareness, is that you can have all the best helmet in the world, but that brain is still going to slosh around inside the skull. I mean, the brain isn't stapled to the inside of the skull. So it's going to move, it's going to bang. There's going to be contusions on brain tissue, depending on the angle of the hit, no matter what. Obviously, the higher the velocity hit, the more bruising and contusion and swelling we're going to see. And that usually coincides with worse symptoms that, as we'll talk about later, can become pretty bad long-term consequences. So if you think about a concussion, most people think, you know, it's just this, you hit it and it's bruised, there's a contusion and there's swelling at that site. But concussion, the brain is sort of more, I like to define it as like a slinky. When you were a kid and you were at the top of the stairs and you sort of walked the slinky down the stairs. I did that, but I don't know if y'all did, but the slinky walk is that front part of the slinky goes down to that stair below, but the back part of the slinky is still on that top step. And everything in the middle of that slinky is stretching. So whenever you have a concussion, the one side that has the area that makes that initial contact with the surface, whether that's another helmet or the ground, that side's going to force really quick into the skull. But the complete opposite side of the brain is going to lag behind, and everything in the middle is going to stretch. Well, that stretching causes damage and swelling to all of the brain tissue in those associated areas. And it also stretches the blood vessels that are in the brain. So you're getting damage to the vasculature at the same time. And that's causing a reduction in blood flow and oxygen to the brain, which it needs to function. So you've got a lot of things going on. And obviously, what areas of the brain are stretched are going to ultimately be what symptoms may be the worst. You may have headaches, you may have dizziness, you may have nausea, you may have forgetfulness, short-term memory impairment. All of these things can be a part of sort of the constellation of symptoms that happen with concussion. So if you look at it that way, that concussion, every one of them slightly different. Yeah, they all have swelling. Yeah, they all have inflammation. Yeah, they all have what's called oxidative stress from this lack of blood flow. All of those things are happening at the same time. You think, how can you have one drug? You're going to have multiple drugs to fight back these different forms of pathology, swelling, inflammation, oxidative stress. Well, what we've created is actually a neurosteroid, and we give it nasally. And by giving it nasally, it can get into the brain in less than 5 minutes. It diffuses into these traumatized brain cells that are swelling and inflamed. And what it does is it goes inside the nucleus of these cells and activates the DNA. And the activation of DNA produces proteins, and these are pro-survival, positive proteins. One of these proteins is an efflux fluid channel that kicks fluid or swelling off of the brain. One of the proteins is a very powerful anti-inflammatory that cools the brain down, makes it where it's not fighting itself when it's going through repair. And last but not least, because of this reduction in blood flow, one of the proteins produced is an antioxidant. So you may think, all right, well, why wouldn't I just take a pill or an antioxidant and, you know, take some ibuprofen for inflammation? And that's why the focus is on driving this nasally directly in the brain. So we want to get it there to the area that is damaged. We don't want to take this orally where it would go systemically everywhere and all parts of your body would be taking it up. So we're able to get specificity to the traumatized brain by giving it nasally. We're able to get about 92% of the drug into the brain and metabolized in the central nervous system when we give it nasally. So we've got a drug also that is very safe. So when you go through all the work, preclinical work that you have to do before you can go put a drug into a human, and obviously once it's in the human is when you start talking about getting FDA approval. But for that, you've got to show that it works in animal models, but you also, even just as important, show that it's safe. There's plenty of drugs out there that could help plenty of diseases, but unfortunately the side effects are so, y'all watch the commercials and those are the ones that get approved. The side effects are so bad that they're not capable of functioning as a treatment. So what we've got is we've done the safety studies in rat, dogs, and monkeys. And we've been able to show that the drug is 380-fold safe. Tylenol is just 100, to give you an example. So when you give it nasally, it gets there fast. It goes to where you want it to go. It's metabolized and used at that traumatized brain site, and it's extremely safe. So y'all want me to keep rambling? Or y'all want
So can I jump in? And the reason why I'm jumping in is because and I'm not sure if Allie's on or not, or she can hear this, but we were involved, or I've been involved with a company that was going through the same processes of, you know, great idea, very safe, but then the next step being phase 1, phase 2, right. Phase 2B, and the FDA has to prove each one of these. Where are you in that process, Jake? And because the speed to the market is going to be important for you because it costs a lot of money, all these tests. I mean, you want some positive support. And I guess that's what we're doing here, is to show people how important this is, so that the FDA, you can present this at FDA, say, look, there's a demand for this, there's a need for this. Let's get the process going. Where are you in that pipeline?
Okay, absolutely. We know it's an unmet need because there's no treatment for it. We know that there's inflammation and swelling, so there is a pathology to treat. So there is a need to treat concussion. Where we are in the process is we've completed toxicology and we're now site set with our nasal device. The drug is all GMP certified, so it's approved to go in a human anywhere in the world. And it's ready to start phase 1 this summer. Phase 1A will be a quick 32 patient safety study. It will then go continuously into a phase 1B, which will be the first look at efficacy in concussed patients. And then it will start phase 2. Phase 2 should begin in about a year. And the phase 2, our goal is to be in concert or be run at trial sites that are associated with NCAA athletic departments. That's the discussion that's ongoing right now.
Good.
Phase 2 is a full, is showing efficacy, and that's the major focus. You're always making sure it's safe. And then after phase 2 is obviously when you can move into treatment for special populations such as military, and you continue through a phase 3 trial for FDA's final approval. Is that clear?
Very clear.
Yeah, and over the last few years, Jake and I have personally met with either groups or a particular person who is in a position that I don't want to say can help, but can help navigate, or maybe steer us to the right channels. I've learned that there's a lot of red tape.
There is,
and the product is outstanding.
We can help. We'll get with Jake, and we're going to push that along because we know a bunch of people at FDA. We know people at the believe it or not, Department of Defense is hugely into some of these things. We push that along the right way. But let's talk a little bit for people who are watching. Jake and Brett, someone gets a concussion, right? You get hit, you get a hard hit. Prevacus, I believe, is the name of the drug. You administer Prevacus. What's the hope for that? Is it immediate? Is it immediate relief? Inflammation goes down, or is it a longer term? Tell us how the drug in real life is going to work.
The nasal device that the drug is in is very lightweight. The drug is stable for over 6 months, over 100 degrees. So it can be kept in a medic's bag, in an athletic trainer's bag on the sideline. You would get a 10 to 15 minute concussion test on the sideline. Mm-hmm. Now there is blood-brain biomarkers, blood biomarkers now that have recently been FDA approved too, to help quantify whether you've had a concussion or not. So we've got a lot of technology helping us enroll now. But to answer your question a little bit more clearly, within 10 to 15 minutes would be the first treatment to get the swelling and inflammation down. And then it will be given twice a day for 14 days, 14 days being a defined period of which symptoms of concussion can wax and wane. You may feel good one day, not the next. You can't just quit the drug. You want to take it twice a day for 14 days. And what our goal is to get players back safer, quicker. Our goal is to get people back to work quicker. Our goal is to get kids back to school quicker. And ultimately, we want to be able to show in the trials that 3 months, 6 months later, that we're not having what's called, that patients are becoming what's called the miserable minority. They're not part of the 15% of concussed patients out there that develop post-concussion syndrome. We want to see that 15% go down, hopefully as close to zero as possible, so people aren't having the lingering effects months later. For example, if you have a kid who's 16, gets a concussion on the football field, he develops post-concussion syndrome. He's having symptoms 3-6 months later. He's developing a learning disability, and he gets held back and doesn't graduate with his class. That's an example of what we want to prevent. And that's possible. About 15% of people who have concussions, even if it's just one, doesn't have to be multiple, can ultimately get post-concussion syndrome and have these issues for months or years.
Brett, do you know immediately when you have a concussion?
Yes and no. I say yes and no because when I started in '92 as an NFL player, very little was known about concussions. The term concussion has been around for quite a while, and I think the obvious concussion anyone can target and say that guy just had a concussion. Whether it's on, and most notably, I think boxing is a good example. The guy gets hit, he's down, he tries to get up, falls back down, he's got rubber legs. We all know he's had a concussion. I mean, no argument needed. But what we now know, and I hate to say we because I don't want to sound like an expert, and I have never met Dr. Amalu, who Will Smith portrayed in the movie Concussion, but I have talked to him on the phone. And I said, well, he says to me, I said, what age do you think there were several things that came out of the conversation that I thought were pretty revealing. I said, what age do you think is a safe age to play tackle football? And he said, there is no safe age. You should not play tackle football. He said, let me just give you an example. And if you've heard this to our viewers, our listeners, just hang with me. But he said, the human brain, the human head is not designed to do what you do in football. And he said, but to give you an example, a woodpecker, for example, and I know it's kind of funny, but he said a woodpecker, what does a woodpecker do? And he sits there and bangs on a tree all day. You know how many concussions he gets? 0. Why? Because his brain and his head is designed to do what it does. He said another example, rams, they're button heads up on the mountain. I mean, and it's an astronomical amount of force between the two. How many concussions? 0. Why? Because they are designed, their head is designed. The brain does not slosh around. And I thought, when I thought about it that way, it sort of made sense. He said, so you can have the best helmet in the world, but it does not stop the whiplash. And most concussions in the NFL are when you hit the turf and your head, the whiplash effect, not head to head. Yeah, there are a large number of head to head, but it's you get hit, you get slung down. My last play as an NFL player was the most harmless hit. I don't even call it a hit. I threw a pass to the left. The guy pushed me. It just kind of harmlessly pushed me, and the field was almost a frozen sheet of ice. And I was looking at the ball as I was going down, and my left side of my head hit the turf, and the lights were out, man. And I was out for probably 30 seconds to a minute. Some guys are out longer. Some guys are out or less than that. But for about 15 minutes, man, I was in a daze. But later on, it came back to me. So the brain and the head of the human body is not designed. So prevention, it can only go so far. Right. But 92, if you had a concussion, you would not ever go to the coach and say, hey, coach, I think I may sit out a little bit because I got a concussion. You'd have gotten a foot right where you know where. Yeah. So, because, you were soft if you had lingering effects of a concussion, or you were thought to be working the system or, whatever. So that has gotten better. That has changed. And that's a good thing. And rule changes are good things. But again, they can only go so far, and there's got to be some type of treatment. And one of the things that I asked Jake initially was, so a guy takes a drug, he can go right back out and play. Not necessarily, but it may not. If I'm 25 years old, I'm in the prime of my career, I'm thinking I'm invincible. But this drug is going to protect you long term, which you may not care so much about at 25 or 21 or even 30. But when you're 51, like I am, I'm worried a lot less about my knees and my ankles. Granted, I've had those surgeries and joint problems, and that's probably going to offer a set of challenges as I get older. But the brain issue is scary, very scary. And especially taking into account my first 16 years, there was no protocol. Right. You got your butt baback out there and played. And,
can I jump in on the protocol for a second? And Doctor and Brett, just weigh in on this. The NFL has stepped up the protocol, concussion protocol, and they've stepped up the rules. But Brett and I talked about this a couple of weeks ago when Mahomes got his bell rung and he had a concussion. The protocol being that you kind of self-diagnose after the game. I'm talking, the days following the concussion. You self-diagnose as a patient. You say, and you self-report. Well, you may want to play in the next game. So you say, I don't have headaches, but maybe you do. Is there more that the NFL should be doing on the protocol side to protect players?
Well, yeah. So basically, for everyone listening, the protocol, and I may not be exact, but there is supposedly an unbiased neuroscience neurologist or someone an expert in the field of brain injuries, concussions, and they're watching the game as a fan, but more or less from up in the booth. And I say unbiased because Patrick Mahomes gets a concussion leading up to the championship game. This guy doesn't care, doesn't even know who Patrick Mahomes is, hypothetically. But he sees that he gets up with rubber legs. He calls down and says he's out till he passes protocol. That could be back in the game at a later point, but more than likely he's out until he's cleared to go back to the field of play, whether it be the present game or the next week's game. So during the week after that, which Patrick didn't go back in, there testing of yourself. You know, basically what that is, and we've all done it. You got a headache or dizziness or a little bit of forgetfulness. But also what people probably don't know is when you enter the league, you take what is called a baseline test, which started about 2007 or 8, give or take, which was right at the end of my career. So what a baseline test is more or less some computer testing, so, you know, some little written stuff, some, you know, like basically you read a story and you go, what is this for? Well, later, if in that testing, you're asked about that story. What color was Mary's wagon?
Right.
You know, stuff like that is basically on it. And so it's a pretty detailed test. It's kind of funny at times. It's kind of goofy, but you score something, and that's your baseline test score. So when you have a concussion, before you're cleared to go back on the field, say you clear everything else, you know, they follow the eyes, you do close your eyes, you know, like the drunk test, you walk in a line, walk backwards, put your arms out to your side. You know, there's all these different testing. So you pass all that, but you take the baseline test again and you score less than what you scored on it first, then you're not cleared.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there are some good protocol, new testing procedures and stuff that were not available. Were not even thought to, well, why would we even have this, you know, years and years ago. So for me, if you think about it, I had 18 years basically of NFL football, 4 years of high school and junior high and elementary that accumulated before this baseline test. So my number was probably going to be a little skewed if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. And even professional, I think they're offering these protocol or baseline tests even in high school now. So that's a good thing. The self-examination is a tricky thing, because here's the problem with that. And you touched on it, Eric. I personally, if I'm playing in a championship game or we're playing in the championship or the Super Bowl the following week, and I had a concussion the week before, I'm going to play. Yeah. Now, I know one thing that I can't control. I can, but I can't control. I mean, I can control if I have headaches. Am I going to tell them I'm having headaches? Probably not.
Right.
But if I fail the baseline test, so I know I better do well in that baseline test, because I better make the same or above score in order to get cleared. So the self-examination and the examination that the doctors pretty much can give you, you know, testing your motor skills and all that stuff, are relatively the same. The baseline is what you have to pass in order to be cleared. Probably that's the last hurdle.
Got it.
I can add a couple things real quick, Eric. One, you know, the issue is when they come into the league and they take the baseline, knowing they want to be able to do as good and better in the future, they may, there was this conspiracy that maybe some players were sort of flunking.
Taking a dive, putting their thumb on the scale at the baseline.
Right. And then the return to play protocol with baseline, like Brett, they also, the independent neurologist checks for visual tracking with certain movements of the head of the concussed individual. The main thing is when you see visual nystagmus and issues with wobbly eyes, that usually means you've had a concussion that's going to take a lot longer to get over. So clearing out the wobbly eye issue by a neurologist is key. And then just as important as the baseline and getting that score goes really back to patient-reported outcomes again here, Eric, because it's based on levels of physical exertion. Day one, you do nothing. Day two, you know, you sit in the film room and watch TV. Day three, you go out with just your helmet on. Day four, you jog. Day five, you're actually taking snaps. So it's looking at how the patient reports after physical exertion.
Doc, can I just ask a layman's question here, and Brett, feel free to weigh in on this. But you know, there's just all this billions of dollars spent on helmet technology, and I guess it's helping. But as from a doctor standpoint, I'm just a common sense kind of guy. If I have two hard shell things on the outside that hit, you're going to create a lot more repercussion or a lot more impact. Why don't they do a softer outside? And I'm saying soft. I'm just saying so that impact of hard is eliminated. You have a little bit of a toned down impact with helmet to helmet. I mean, are they worried about losing the sound of helmet to helmet? The aesthetics of the football block or hit?
Well, I think the new helmets, in theory, are absorbing some of the blow, which is
from the inside, though, right? From the inside. Why
inside,
not?
And they've done some major testing, and I don't know if it was last year or the year before, the NFL put $60 million into helmets. Correct me if I'm wrong, Jake.
No, you're right. I think they ultimately put $100 million into a company called Visus, which is no longer, it's not very viable right now. Hopefully that technology will come back. Very expensive to make that helmet, but they were trying to get the cost of goods down. But Rydell and Shoot are monsters in this area, so it's hard to compete.
Again, though, the outer shell, I don't know the thickness. I don't know. But your point is absorbing some of that blow. But again, here's the problem, though. You stop, the brain keeps moving.
Yeah.
Whereas a woodpecker or a ram, and there are other animals that are designed, they're in sort of a protective cocoon that keeps it from sloshing around. There is nothing that protects us from it sloshing around.
Yeah.
Right. So the guys are getting bigger. The guys are getting faster. The guys are getting stronger. Mm-hmm. You have quarterbacks now that are 275 pounds. The average line when I was a rookie in the NFL, the average line was roughly between 295 to 305, 304, give or take. If a guy weighed 305, he probably wasn't the greatest athlete. Nowadays, you got a guy 350 that runs like a deer.
Yeah.
And so the rule changes have helped to a certain extent, but you get hit by a 350-pound guy running full speed, something's got to give. And
you're right, Brett. I mean, if you watch football, I watch nonstop. I mean, it's not the helmet to helmet that creates a concussion. It's the ground. It's the ground. It's all. Yeah, I mean, even Mahomes' last hit, where it didn't even look that bad, and he was until he hit the ground. When he hit the ground, he was gone.
Exactly.
Gone, boy.
To your point on that, the number one cause of concussion is motor vehicle accidents, and people just get whiplash injury. They don't even have to hit their head. It's just the whiplash. But obviously with football, you can get that whiplash, but ultimately you do have to hit the ground. But if we've got time, I'd like to talk a little bit about second impact syndrome, which is a deadly result from concussion. And oftentimes those are associated with hitting the back of your head, very similar to what happened to Brett on his last play, on his concussion.
Dale Earnhardt, too.
Yeah. Do y'all know what second impact syndrome is?
No.
All right. Second impact syndrome is when you've had one concussion and you go back into play too soon and you get a second concussion and it causes massive hemorrhaging in your brain. There was a national news that was on Sports Illustrated back in 2016. A kid named Grant Milton, really great athlete, ran a 4.40, played linebacker in Texas. They were in the state playoffs. Grant, had some concussions before the week leading up. Maybe he wasn't sleeping as good, kind of hanging around, but he was still with it. Went out there, had having a great game, and got a second concussion. And that's, maybe 7-10 days have gone by since the last one. We could have treated that and got that headed back in the right direction. He goes back into that game, gets a second concussion, has a massive hemorrhage, seizures on the sidelines. Grant was lucky to survive. He was only 7 minutes from Baylor Medical Center. If he hadn't been so close to the hospital, and the neurosurgeon was on call that night, or he probably would have passed away. Grant is in long-term care for the rest of his life. On a feeding tube, lost his speech, went from a great athlete being recruited by big schools to, lucky to live and going to have this with the support of his family forever. So definitely something we need to consider.
Brett, we can wrap it here if you want to make some final comments on Dr. Jake V. I'm not going to try and pronounce his last name, Dr. Jake V, and the drug and where it stands and what you state the case, and we'll
I just and this has been talked about a bunch, and I don't want to go much longer, but concussions, getting back to just the concussion itself. Mm-hmm. It was, I think everyone again knows when they see a concussion or have one. And I go back to Dr. Amalu, and in that discussion I had with him, he said, "How many concussions do you think you had?" And I said 3. And this was after I was done playing. And I say 3 because there were 3 where I was mentally, I was out of it. Didn't know what happened. I can't say that I was in pain. I can't say that how dizzy I was, but I didn't remember how I got to the sidelines. And he said, "Okay, but what you don't realize is you've probably," he said, "How long did you play?" He had no clue. He knows nothing about football, which is good. I said, "I played 20 years, 19 of them, I didn't miss a game." He said, I'm going to say you've had thousands of concussions. And I said, "Really? How can you say that?" And he said, "Well, how many times have you," he said, "you've heard the term seeing stars or fireworks or your bell got rung," meaning ringing in the ears. And I said, "Gosh, Doc, too many to count." He goes, "Those are concussions, and those do the damage." He said, "Think about a boxer. How many knockout blows do they have as opposed to the jabs to the head? One knockout blow, 100 jabs that hit them." Mm-hmm. He said, "Those jabs are doing a tremendous amount of damage to the brain. It takes a pretty good bit, but that was really revealing to me and scary, because I'm thinking, 3, I kind of went unscathed in 20 years. But how many times did I get sacked or I tripped and fell and my head hit the turf and I was like, it was like a loud noise in my helmet. No telling how many times that happened. And there's where the fear lies in the future. What am I going to be like Junior Seau or Mike Webster, the great Hall of Fame guy who was living in his car, and there's endless examples of guys that have had repercussions from their play in football. Mm-hmm. So I just want everyone to know, if you don't know this already, that you don't have to be knocked out cold to have a concussion. In fact, that's probably the least of which is out there. It's, 10%. You're still playing, but you had a concussion because no one knows that you saw stars. And how many of those players are going to say, "Man, I'm going to go over and I'm going to take myself out of the game because I just saw stars." But then what Jake talked about, that second impact, but there's that potential. And one of the things, I don't know if Jake mentioned this, because I did ask Jake this. I said initially about this product, I said, "So do you have to have a diagnosed 100% sure concussion to take this drug?" No. If you think someone's had a concussion and they take the drug, it's not going to hurt them.
Right.
It's not like there are other stuff that you take that it was unneeded. This is doing good regardless. So that's my last little bit.
Yeah, and don't forget how many kids across the country are playing football, playing soccer, contact, in soccer or wherever else. Yeah, Doc, final thought?
Yeah, well, I think the good news now is after the long 8-year journey Brett and I have been on together is we've recently been acquired by Odyssey Group International. The stock symbol is ODYY, and we have the funding mechanism now to cover the clinical trials. So now we're only about 8 weeks away from really getting started and getting this thing in humans. So, and fingers crossed, obviously tough job to get through the FDA, but the drug hadn't let us down yet. And we're gonna ride it. So we're
and you know, I think the emergence of Odyssey coming in and bringing the funding that we need.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a lot of people like myself, Kurt Warner and Abby Wambach, who is very instrumental from the soccer viewpoint. And a lot of girls have suffered concussions and heading the ball. I mean, certainly not my expertise, but we got a lot of people who are behind us. Now we have Odyssey, and I think that's going to help us with this. I know it's going to help us with this funding, so we certainly need it. There
you go, Odyssey Group. I just looked it up. That's my world, Dr. Jacob. The stock world. Take a look at that. All right, Dr. Jake V, Brett Favre. The topic was concussions. Very, very informative, fascinating, and it's probably some content that more people need to see. You can, Doc, maybe you want to send that over to the NFL and maybe even to UFC and other sports franchises. Dr. Jake V, Brett, awesome, good time. Any final thoughts, anyone? We're all good to go.
Thanks for having me. Thanks, Brett.
You're welcome.